All right, we'll get started here. So thank you everyone again for joining us today. And like our previous webinars, this session is going to be recorded, and we'll be posting that to our YouTube channel as well. And like our others, please be sure that your microphones are muted. And if you have any questions, please submit those into the Q&A chat or email those to info@ninjaag.com. Also, please share and engage with us on social media. Our handles is at NinjaAg LLC or using the hashtag NinjaAg. And so today we're going to discuss one of our methods we use, if not the most important method, which is reference strips and the response that matters. So all of our methodologies come from land-grant universities and from peer-reviewed, publicly accessible research. And today we're going to focus on those reference strips. And so the concept of reference strips date back to the early 1990s. And the idea was to determine if this top dress nitrogen is needed. And so these reference strip technology is now being widely used across the United States and in many countries around the world. And this picture that I have here is actually a grower in Mexico who traditionally applied 300 pounds of nitrogen per acre plus an additional 150 pounds of nitrogen per acre top dress. And on one side of the field, he applied his traditional 300 pounds of nitrogen, but on the other side of the field, he applied zero. He didn't apply anything. And when it came to time to apply that top dress, you couldn't see the response difference from the zero applied and what that 300 pounds of nitrogen he applied. And so he ended up not applying any extra top dress to that field. He still cut 150 bushel average across both sides of the field. So even with no nitrogen, yield potential was not impacted because of the historic overuse. And so by utilizing this reference strip technology, the field showed that not only did he not need that extra 150 pounds of nitrogen, he didn't need any nitrogen at all that year. Depending upon last year's yield and the current environmental conditions, nitrogen fertilizer needs can vary. Soil test is going to give you an accurate determination of the amount of nitrogen that's available in that exact. However, if we're using these decisions that are going to be made from a pre-plant soil test, there's really no accurate way to estimate the amount of nitrogen either mineralized or lost during that period. And the only way to know how much nitrogen was being made between planting and the time of top dress would be using reference strips. Now there's two different types of reference strips that we use, an enriched strip and a zero check. Both are going to be used to let the crop tell you how much nitrogen it has access to. And this also gives the producer something to look at and watch throughout the season as well. Most farmers and growers can tell you a story about the time where the fertilizer applicator got skipped or doubled up on a pass. And at the end of the season, they could see that. And this was effectively an accidental response strip. And so we use these reference strips in each field to be able to provide a site-specific recommendation. And we use that to be able to compare that strip to what the rest of the field is doing. The enriched strip is an area in the field that has received more nitrogen. And more nitrogen is, at least 40 to 50 pounds per acre above. In areas where you have more loss that's going to be due to, say leaching or denitrifications, those rates are going to need to be higher. And so the rest of the field is receiving the standard pre-plant rate. and this is what we call our farmer practice. And so an enriched strip is basically the field's communication outlet to you and to your grower, identifying that need for nitrogen. And the most basic use for an enriched strip is a yes or no indicator. When you look out and you see that reference strips in your field and it's showing up, it's visible, that means yes, the field needs nitrogen. However, if the strip is not showing up and it's not visible, it's saying no, the field does not need extra nitrogen right now at this time. Maybe we come back and check in a few days. It's one of the most simple forms of precision agriculture that a producer can adopt. And it helps us in communicating to you if and when nitrogen is needed, which is key to growing a successful crop. The zero check is basically the opposite of the enriched strip, where no nitrogen is applied. For the enriched strip option, we have a high rate of nitrogen applied in one part of the field, and we want the rest of the field to be able to catch up. In the zero check case, the rest of the field receives a minimum nitrogen application rate, and the strip gets zero nitrogen. So we can kind of think of our field as our enriched strip and our zero check as our farmer practice or our environmental potential. And same as the enriched strip, if the zero check is visible, nitrogen is in demand and a nitrogen application is needed. If the zero check is not showing up, then nitrogen is not needed at this time, and we might come back in a couple days and check it again. Reference strips can also bring added value to ongoing agronomic practices such as tissue testing. And tissue testings, they utilize predetermined critical thresholds. And these values, they can be disputed and argued about, the accuracy, but most will recognize that there's, genetics and environment that's going to impact these critical values. But the benefit of having reference strips of nitrogen or, any other nutrient is that it could provide a baseline. If you sample from that strip and that it's going to be unlimited, it can provide a great deal of value to that tissue testing by adding that baseline. Nitrogen reference strips are, they say a lot about our current environment. In years where we have high production, these reference strips will likely indicate the need for more nitrogen or indicate the need for less nitrogen in years where growing conditions are poor. We utilize NDVI imagery to be able to make precise variable rate nitrogen recommendations mid-season. And without reference strips in each field, we would not be able to identify the need for nitrogen. And I shared this slide in our imagery webinar showing the different values that NDVI is used for. And it works great for these, great for scouting, stand counts, sampling different things. But without these reference strips, we cannot look at this image and know that this green area is going to be a response from nitrogen, or that the red areas are nitrogen deficient. Maybe they're a drowned out spot, maybe it's impact from pest, or any other issue we can't identify without ground truthing. And so for applying nitrogen, when it's not in demand, it can be lost in multiple pathways, whether that's leaching, volatilization, immobilization, or even denitrification, depending on those current environments. Reference strips, they should be applied at or before planting. These enriched strip applications, they can be delayed after planting as well, depending, what your crop is. And it's not too late to get some enriched strips out now if you have some winter wheat in your area. We want at least, one strip is recommended in every field every year. And it's really best to change those locations each year to be able to avoid overloading those areas with nitrogen. The strip should be placed in an area that's going to be best represent that field. Many people question, if the strip accounts for full spatial variability within a field. While it's probably ideal to have multiple strips, a single strip can provide enough information to be able to address the temporal variability of nitrogen domain within a field. Often, even for just a variable rate management, getting that right average is the most important aspect. The best case scenario, on a field with a significant variability is to apply maybe one or more field length strips across all potential zones. The field length strip will allow you to determine in-season response zones. Another option is to place maybe some smaller strips in each of those as pre-established management zones or maybe even some yield zones. And with these, approaches, we can have site-specific variable rate application that can be prescribed for each of those. If you have multiple hybrids or varieties out in the field, you'd want a reference strip within each of those or one that crosses each of those hybrids or varieties. This reference strip technology, it can be applied in various crops, like wheat, corn, cotton, or even other specialty crops. But this is a practical practice that can be scaled across your fertility management or other management practices and various crops as well. When it comes to, field layouts of what these reference strips look like I briefly mentioned, here's an example of a field that you can see it's got, a few different zones in there. And so our options that we can do when we're laying these out is, here's having that field length strip that covers all those zones, or we can break that out and have, multiple strips that kind of go into each of those zones. Another example here, another field that's similar that's got, a little different layout. And so, what we can do, maybe diagonal across, put a reference strip that's going to cover all of those, or break that up to where we can have, multiple strips within each of those zones. So depending on how you want to do it, but we'll work with you too and figuring out the best way to get those out. When it comes to applying those reference strips and what's being used to apply with those reference strip applicators, make it easy. There's a lot of different options out there, and we can work with you and provide some consultation to help figure out, the best, most economical solution, to incorporate reference strips into your operation. And so, the most simplest form is this my favorite one here in the center. Right here is a push spreader. There's a lot of guys that go out with a bag of urea and then push spread, these strips out, and oftentimes they're just using it as a yes or no indicator whether they need it, nitrogen, mid-season, and they're probably, driving 70 miles an hour down the highway and checking those strips. But that's a way to get it out. It's simple and easy to do. Another very common and popular is up here. You have an ATV or UTV, and a lot of guys have these that have like a 30 or a 50-gallon tank on the back with, like a 50 or anywhere from a 10 to a 20-foot boom on there where they can, put those out. Another common one is a lot of people ended up, they write pre-plant prescriptions. And an easy way to get these out is to write a reference strip, whether that's the zero check or the Enriched strip within that pre-plant prescription. It's very simple. It's very easy. It doesn't take much time to get those in there. And then they're not worried about having to get those applied because it's going to be applied whenever they apply that pre-plant application. And then they're also mapped, and they're going to know where those reference strips are within that field too. So there's a lot of different options out there to get these out. And like I mentioned, we're going to work with you to figure out the best way to get those out in your fields. Reference strips are the base and foundation of Ninja Ag's recommendations. And so when we apply these reference strips, like I mentioned, we get those out. Pre-plant applications are being applied, or maybe shortly after planting. And we'll work with you, figure out, like I said, to get those out in your fields, how to seamlessly get those out. But what do you do once you have those strips out? So we're basically waiting and watching for those strips to show up. Once they are visible, whether you see those with your naked eye or within your NDVI imagery, that's the time nitrogen's in demand, and so we need to collect our green seeker data. Once you have that information, you can upload your NDVI imagery and your green seeker data into Ninja Ag and create your nitrogen recommendation, a yield potential, and a return on investment report from these research proven methods and algorithms that you selected. And within minutes, you can have a recommendation to be able to share with your grower and to apply those. If we're applying these nitrogen mid-season when these strips are not showing up, we're leaving that nitrogen out in the field to be able to be lost in multiple forms because there's not a demand for nitrogen at that time. But when we do apply mid-season, when those strips are showing up, we're becoming more efficient. We're increasing that nitrogen use efficiency because the plant is able to use that nitrogen when it's in demand, and which is indicated by that reference strip. So what do these reference strips look like in action? Here's an example of a grower who spent 10 hours putting out reference strips and collecting green seeker data across 2,200 acres a week. He had a net return of $42,000 because the algorithms reduced the nitrogen rate based on that response to the Enriched strip. The demand, for nitrogen ended up being less than what he applied year after year after year. And so the dollars per hour came out to be $4,200 per hour. And on average was $19 per acre ROI across those 2,200 acres a week. And then the yield potential, he actually cut within 3 to 4 bushels on final yield across all those fields. And so when using these methods, the average ROI for wheat is around $10 an acre, and then $20 an acre for corn. Personally, I put out some strips that were covered across 10 fields with a four-wheeler applicator and about a 10-mile radius, and it took me about a half a day. It took me longer to unload and load and drive to the next field than it did to apply these reference strips. And so, and even map them out too while I was there. And it doesn't take, a whole lot of time to get these reference strips out and collect the green seeker data. And like I mentioned, we're going to work with you to figure out the best way to do that. But the dollars per acre it takes to use our methods, it shows to be worth the time. So our take home, reference strips are a simple form of precision ag, where the most basic use is a yes or no if nitrogen is going to be needed mid-season. There are no risk, minimum to no investment that is going to be scalable across your fertility management strategies and various crops. This is a way to grow that relationship, with your grower with a simple, transparent form of precision agriculture. We know that these nitrogen reference strips are going to be directly linked to nitrogen response, and this is going to add value to your NDVI imagery, knowing that that area is a response to nitrogen. Reference strips are going to provide an important part of that nitrogen rate. We're assuming that the crop will respond to that nitrogen application without the reference strips in each field. And by having reference strips located in every field, we can identify site-specific needs based on the environmental conditions at that time. With NDVI coupled with these reference strips, this is going to allow us to make an accurate in-season nitrogen recommendation. We're going to increase our nitrogen use efficiency, and we're going to decrease the nitrogen loss based on that plant's response to nitrogen. If you'd like to look at any of the resources that we use in this presentation, those are available here at ninjaag.com/resources. Here's my contact information if you have any questions that did not get answered today, or if you'd like to learn more about reference strips or Ninja Ag in general. Here's my phone number. Here's my email. Please call or email me anytime, and I'd be glad to work with you. But thank you guys. I really appreciate it, and I'll answer any questions if you have any at this time.
So Tyler, we've got a few questions that have been emailed in.
Okay.
One, somebody wants to know, how do you know what reference strip type to use?
Yeah, so both types of reference strips can be used in various crops. And with all of our crops that are listed in our system, when it comes to a lot of people, they use both. They put out the zero check and they put out an Enriched strip, and they can compare those. Or, but whenever you run those into our system, you just, select one or the other. But, if there's fields where historically high nitrogen rates are being applied up front, that zero check is probably going to benefit a little better, where likely that Enriched strip would probably have, little to no response. So depending on what that is, but you can use both.
Okay.
Hey Tyler, I got one that emailed in.
Yes, sir.
This customer has several fields just right across from each other. Is it necessary to apply reference strips in each one of those fields?
Yes, we definitely want a reference strip in each field. That way we can have those site-specific recommendations.
Okay, and I got another one. Since you put so much nitrogen down on your enriched strip, will it still be good for next year's crop?
No, we recommend applying reference strips each year in each field to be able to account for those current environmental conditions. And we also want to be able to change the location of those strips every year. That way we can avoid overloading those areas of nitrogen as well.
Does it have to be a certain size?
Certain size, we definitely want a minimum of 100 feet long. And it also kind of depends on your resolution of imagery as well. So you can probably get away with a smaller strip where you have high resolution imagery, like maybe say a drone, for example. But if you have, satellite based, that's, probably a lower resolution, then you definitely want to, be wider, probably say around maybe minimum of 45 feet wide on that.
What crops can you use reference strip technology in?
Yeah, we can use these strips in various different crops. Our current list of crops that we have in our system includes wheat, winter wheat, spring wheat, canola. We have winter annual forages, corn, cotton, and sorghum. But we're not limited to these crops as well with the reference strips. These could also be used in different specialty crops.
How late can you apply reference strips?
A general kind of rule of thumb would be, within 30 to 45 days after planting for the majority of the crops. These later applications, when it comes for wheat, we want probably at least, 45 days prior to that last in application.
Okay, it looks like we have another question. Where should I place enriched strip?
You want to be able to place your reference strips where it will accurately represent the field. But field bench strip, that's going to give you enough information to be able to cover that temporal variability of nitrogen demand within that. Great questions.
Okay, it looks like we have one more that just came in. Are enriched strips the best management practice for my farm? And if so, why or why?
Absolutely, yes. These reference strips are used to let the crop tell you how much nitrogen it has access to. And the simplest form, is a yes or no, if that crop's needing nitrogen at that time. When we couple that with the green seeker, we're able to basically provide a nitrogen recommendation, a yield potential, and a return on investment report. And these reports are going to, record and document, the economical and environmental impacts of that field, while we're also increasing, that conversation with the growers to be able to communicate the value of the service we're delivering.